Welcome to the discussion. My guests today are Sean Mullen, Senior Vice President in Corporate Business Development and Sales at Perspecta, and Stu Hammer, Senior Director, Application Offering and Advisory Services at Perspecta as well. For our conversation today, we're going to talk about cloud, but it's a little different discussion than what we've had in the last 7 or 10 years with agencies and contractors. It's not a matter of if or should, but when and how. It's no longer talking about infrastructure or platform, but software and applications, and most importantly, mission improvements. And we're going to continue our discussion about how agencies can make the right decisions of which applications should be moved to the cloud, which ones should be retired, and which ones should maybe be updated but still kept on-premise in agency data centers. Let me start with Sean. We've been talking about this move to the cloud for quite a while, right? It feels like a decade at least. Where are agencies today? It's a much different conversation.
It is, Jason. And as you probably heard from a lot of people come talk to you, they're all in different parts of their journey, right? But after all these years, I do think there is some clarity in the market that we're starting to see now. We're seeing that clearly the end state is going to be a hybrid environment. So there's going to be public, there's going to be private, there's going to be off-prem, there's going to be on-prem. We're seeing a movement to as-a-service delivery and consumption models, whether, as you mentioned, infrastructure, platform, software, or overall managed service environment, right? We're seeing the drivers of cloud not only be the same as they were, but even be exceeded in terms of not just cost savings, but they want to improve mission effectiveness. They want to talk about agility. They want to drive agile development. So those things are all driving to this tipping point we're at now, which is we're moving from some of those initial deployments, a lot of public websites and things like that, to a true plan of what's going to move to the cloud. And that's really where we are as a company, right? We are, as a legacy company, did a lot of data center work. You know, did old hosting, infrastructure, ran government data centers. We as a company now have to evolve into a cloud services provider. And so as we look, as you talked about, with our current partners or new customers going forward, it's about getting in there and helping them on their journey. We go in there, we advise, we talk about transformation, and then eventually get to a run state. And that's where Stu and his team have really developed some capabilities to help them on that journey.
Yeah, Sean, let me supplement that. So we have a capability, and it really pivots off of some of the apps rationalization and moving to the cloud. It's called our application transformation to cloud. It's advise, transform, and manage. It's really about the advisory doing a top-down, bottom-up analysis of the portfolio, really understanding, shaking it out, and clearly coming up with a plan, a strategy, a roadmap for cloud suitability around those applications. What stays, what goes, and what needs to be remediated. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges agencies have, just simply understanding their portfolio and driving what needs to be done with that portfolio, especially, as Sean mentioned, in a hybrid model where you're going to have what stays in the data center and what goes into the cloud and which cloud, and making that transformation. And that's the other aspect. And once you develop that roadmap and the key capabilities around short-term, medium and long-term capabilities, getting it into the cloud and building that strategy, building and executing on it, and helping the agencies get there. Today, I believe that they have done a good job of moving their IT, email, collaboration. Now they're in mission, now they're in the business, and it's a little more complex. This is where, you know, the transformation services really kick in. And then ultimately, as Sean mentioned, how do we manage it and run it in an as-a-service model?
I want to go back to something that Sean said, but there's plenty to follow up on. You talk about the consumption-based model. Now, Perspecta is known in many ways for the managed services, right? I mean, if you look back at go back to your old EDS days, right? NMCI is your most famous, and in many ways, and I know that maybe some people would disagree, successful NMCI has worked out NGen now. Why is the consumption model different than managed services? Maybe we could put a finer line around those two.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it as a service, and clearly when you talk about the cloud, as you mentioned, people talk about infrastructure as a service, so they talk about hosting and moving that right away. And then software as a service, as the government goes forward and starts to really adopt COTS types technology, they get that as a service now. They don't buy a COTS product, they don't build a GOTS product, they don't go develop from scratch, right? So whether it's Workday, whether it's Salesforce, something like that. And platform as a service is really where they're going to launch. As you talk about, we have a long history as a managed service. Delivery model can be the same. It's fixed price, it's with SLAs. We deliver a service, but the environment's different, right? It's not the government data centers to desktops. Now we're going from cloud to handhelds, right? So the delivery model's the same, our strengths are still the same, but the environment's changing dramatically from NMCI of 2001 to where Air Force, Army, Navy going as enterprise as a service, right? And that's where I think the integrators, not just us, but everyone in town, are moving into those skill sets, right? It's our number one strategy. It's what drove our first acquisition as a new company. We bought NightPoint, and they are a managed service provider around cloud security as a service for DHS and DISA. I mean, that was a statement of how important, what we see the market going, and how important this is to our market.
I think that it's a fascinating that the model has changed. I mean, it had to change because of the cloud. But again, I'll go back to our agencies. Are they able to buy managed service? I think they can buy. They can tell you or whomever, we'll buy X and we'll give you Y. Mm-hmm. But consumption is that's a different challenge.
Yeah, measuring. I mean, clearly, so Air Force. I'll just use a couple examples. Air Force and Army right now are moving out, and they're actually calling it enterprise IT as a service, right? So they're using the OTA model to do a lot of experiments, right? So how do I get direct network access? How do I get to the public cloud? How do I do storage and end user, right? And clearly, part of that learning curve, why they're taking these bite sizes with these OTAs, is to learn that consumption model, delivery and consumption, right? You don't want to dial something to 10 and leave it there because then you're not saving the money, right? You got to learn to adapt and take advantage of the scalability that cloud gives you, right? That is the advantage for the government, and that's what I think they're starting to learn through some of these OTAs and experiments and pilots.
And Stu, part of that consumption model, understanding how to buy and consume like we do electricity or so many other things, is understanding what you have and what those needs are. And so walk me through that as you guys work with agencies and help them understand their inventories and their roadmap. What are you seeing? Do they have a pretty good idea of where they want to go? Or is it the type of thing what we saw with some of the cybersecurity efforts around the government where, wow, we had 30% more devices or access points than we realized? What are you seeing from customers?
Typically, what we see is that agencies don't have a really good understanding of their entire portfolio. Mm-hmm. They have a pretty good understanding of some of the core mission systems, but when it's extended beyond that and really understanding that, and what I mean by that is looking at it from an application perspective, infrastructure, and then also the organization. And that portfolio is critical to drive that consumption model, to understand the agility you're going to get, the cost savings you're going to get as you move into that as a service capability. So we have really sharpened the spear, so to speak, in terms of being able to put a GPS compass on this and being able to really look at it from their current state, doing a top-down, bottom-up, looking at it from cost, risk, and technical quality and functional quality, and really the cloud suitability, security issues, and and then driving that into a roadmap and a wave plan that can be executed in short, medium, and long-term initiatives. And those really typically fall into the either you can lift and shift it, rehost it, refactor it, where most of the agency portfolio is falling, or simply having to rebuild it, re-architect, or replace it.
If I had to just jump in, Jason, I mean, what we don't want to have is random acts of cloud, right? So we don't want people just going that. And some of the challenges that the government has always been there. So it's organizational, it's cultural, it's the resource owners, all different point of view. So as you know, from many different attempts at this at the enterprise level, you got to deal with various resource owners, and that can be a challenge. And so the government is getting better at that, and they're getting better at acquiring cloud. So we're getting there. Again, we're reaching that tipping point in willingness to move mission and business apps. We're getting there in willingness to change the way they want to do business, and in their willingness to organize and behave differently.
I love that random acts of cloud. I think for the last decade, I think we've had a few random acts.
True.
When you talk about the other models, the infrastructure, platform, or software, I mean, we talked a little bit as a service. Are you starting to see agencies also move off of the initial infrastructure and move to platform and to software? Is that starting to pick up steam? Maybe Sean?
What I see is infrastructure was the easiest move, right? And it moves you out, it gets you out of data centers, gets you out of hosting, and it moves you into a commercial cloud or a private environment. And clearly, I think software as a service is behind that as a second. The government is now starting to buy those commercial packages which are delivered as a service. Platform is where the real benefit will be reached, but I don't see it there yet. Contracts and platforms are still being put in place. But clearly, if you went up the tier in the pecking order, first one's being done, second one's being done, the third one is where I think you're going to see the maximum benefit.
And why is platform, maybe Stu, you can jump in on this, why is platform the maximum benefit versus software. I would think with the number of applications, as you've probably seen, if they can move 80%, 70%, whatever that number is to the cloud, that would be the maximum benefit. But why platform?
Well, from a couple perspectives. Number one, software as a service is utopia, obviously, but there's cost, and all roads lead to money with the agencies. So there's a cost in running that. You can run your ERP, you can run your HR system as a software as a service model, and many agencies are doing it. And it's focused on that shared services model that the government's trying to push. But there is a cost, and there's as Sean was referencing, the platform as a service gives the next step up from the infrastructure as a service to really drive flexibility, because your developers are building their applications and deploy. You don't have to worry about the deployment. It's all containerized, and it's managed by the cloud service providers, and it gives you a lot more flexibility if you don't want to deal with all the complexity around dealing with the hundreds of services that you have to focus on.
I think it really enables the agile environment, the agile development, right? So that's where they really have to go to really improve citizen services and obviously some of their mission effectiveness.
We should talk about cloud and IT modernization more broadly. Really got a big push after the major breach at the 2015 at the Office of Personnel Management. And the real push for IT modernization, and cloud again was a big part of that, was cybersecurity. I get a sense today that what's driving the move to the cloud, what's driving IT modernization, yes, cyber, but more than just cyber these days. What do you see as you talk to customers? Is cyber kind of the 1A, but there's a 1 in front of it?
Yeah, I mean, Stu can talk about this at length because he writes papers on it, I think. Not that I read them. But at the end of the day, the legacy environment's chewing up their budget. I mean, at the end, you can't get around it, right? Some of it's not being supported. And it's just, what is the stats? Like 80% of their budget is going to supporting that legacy environment. No matter what, they have to move. It's chewing up their whole budget, right? So to me, that is, the cost savings has always been the immediate draw and attractiveness because they can modernize and they can align to where they want to bring their mission. And then clearly security, machine learning, AI, and all the stuff that can be enabled through the cloud. But that legacy environment's really choking their budgets.
I'll just supplement what Sean has mentioned, and the cost savings is a big driver behind this. But I think the other issues are really kind of the forcing function around some of the legislation, the modernizing government technology, the aspects of OMB pushing out the cloud smart. And even though some of the legislation is somewhat slowing down, the focus of these agencies has really picked up from what it's been over the last, say 7 years. On focusing on modernization and driving that forward. And the one other thing that I'll mention is agility. Mm-hmm. And cost savings certainly, but agility is really a key driver. I mean, we've seen in some of our DoD clients, not just the cost savings, but we've seen a significant improvement in the time to value, where releases were taking over months down to weekly. And our stakeholders are like, I don't have to worry about you testing or delivering that. I can see the results on an agile basis real quickly.
We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the discussion Cloud Strategies, sponsored by Perspecta on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.